Thank you, dear friends, and welcome to our morning session. Today we will be talking about sincerity and what its implications mean. And also, as just like last night, we'll be sharing a glimpse of two individuals that really demonstrated this quality of sincerity. So, just to recap with you, if you weren't with us last night we talked about transformation of character. And transformation of character, we talked about, is at the very foundation of the faith of God. And we talked about the quote from His Holiness Baha'u'llah, where he states, "And yet is not the object of every revelation to effect a transformation in the whole character of mankind, a transformation that shall manifest itself both outwardly and inwardly, that shall affect both its inner life and external conditions." And he goes on, this is very important again, friends, "For if the character of mankind be not changed, the futility of God's universal manifestations would be apparent." So, at the very heart of the revelation of Baha'u'llah, at the very heart of the revelation of all the manifestations of God, is this concept of transformation of character. How do we go about doing this? And what are the qualities and attributes that are essential in transforming our character? So for this morning's talk, after reflecting on our talk yesterday on the importance of transformation of character and having that glimpse of the life of Baha'i, the pride of the martyrs, today we'd like to share with you one of these virtues, which is really and has been given the title the foundation stone of faith. So transformation of character is at the very heart of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. Now, what is at the heart of transformation of character? Because transformation of character is what every single person on this planet should do. Now, what is at the very heart of this transformation of character? It's sincerity. Now, this is so amazing, friends. He says, let me pull the quote for you. So he says, I don't want to use my own words. He says, "O friends of God, verily the pen of sincerity enjoineth on you the greatest faithfulness." Now this is from Abdul Baha. He says, "By the life of God, its light is more evident than the light of the sun. In its light and its brightness and its radiance, every light is eclipsed." Now he goes on. He says, "We desire of God that He will not withhold from His cities and lands the radiant effulgence of the sun of faithfulness. We have directed all in the nights and the days to faithfulness, chastity, purity, and constancy, and have enjoined good deeds and well-pleasing qualities." So this is the qualities and attributes that His Holiness Abdul Baha is seeking in the friends. He says, if any of you enters a city, he must become the center of attraction because of the sincerity. This is the first one he states, and this is in Baha'i World Faith, page 400. He could have picked any quality to be the first one, but in this quote, he says the first one is, if any one of you enters a city, he must become the center of attraction because of his sincerity. Then he goes on, faithfulness, love, honesty, fidelity, truthfulness, and loving kindness of his disposition and nature toward all the inhabitants of the world, that the people of that city may all cry out, "This person is unquestionably a Baha'i. How wonderful! For his manners, his behavior, his conduct, his morals, his nature, and his disposition are of the attributes of the Baha'is. And then he goes on, he says, until you do attain to this station, you have not fulfilled the covenant and the testament of God. Wow. He says, for according to the irrefutable text, he has taken from us a firm covenant that we may live and act in accord with the divine exhortations, commands, and lordly teachings. He says, until you do attain to this station, you have not fulfilled the covenant and the testament of God. It is in our covenant as a Baha'i to fulfill this, to transform our character with these heavenly virtues: sincerity, faithfulness, love, honesty, fidelity, truthfulness, and loving kindness to all humanity. Friends, this is incredible. So he goes on, and there's quote after quote in the writings of Baha'u'llah, Abdul Baha, on the importance of this divine quality, namely sincerity. He says, if thou desirest to soften the hearts and bring thy friends under the shadow of the tree of life, show forth firmness and integrity day by day. Increase thy sincerity. This is from Abdul Baha. And severance, until by the power of the truth thou wilt soften and subdue the hearts and awaken the souls of the heedless. And very, very important. I mean, think of all the qualities and attributes that we have. Without sincerity, it is just talk. Sincerity is that purity of motive, the purity of the heart. Without, if you are trying to profess love to someone, with lacking the qualities and attributes of sincerity, it's cheap. It doesn't have the power of that love that transcends, and you feel, and it's tangible, and the entire world is uplifted. With sincerity, that is what transmuteth the character, changes the hearts, and is one of the qualities and attributes that Abdul Baha is seeking in his. He says, if he is a Baha'i in reality. Now this is so amazing. This is in Promulgation of Universal Peace, page 336. Page 336, Promulgation of Universal Peace. Now, this is where Abdul Baha also states what it is to be a Baha'i in reality. He says, if he is a Baha'i in reality, his deeds and actions will be decisive proofs of it. And he says, what are the requirements? This is straight from Promulgation of Universal Peace. He says, love for mankind, sincerity toward all, reflecting the oneness of the world of humanity, philanthropy, becoming enkindled with the fire of the love of God, attainment to the knowledge of God, and that which is conducive to human welfare. And he says, now this is from Secret of Divine Civilization, page 96. And this is what I was getting at when I first started talking about this foundation stone of faith. A foundation is the very base of a building. The foundation stone is what holds the whole building together. So imagine, all the virtues cannot hold their weight unless you have sincerity, that purity of heart, purity of motive. Sincerity, this is from Abdul Baha, Secret of Divine Civilization, page 96. He says, sincerity is the foundation stone of faith. That is, a religious individual must disregard his personal desires and seek in whatever way he can wholeheartedly to serve the public interest. And it is impossible for a human being to turn aside from his own selfish advantages and sacrifice his good for the good of the community except through true religious faith. The foundation stone of faith. This is, friends, this is from Baha'u'llah. He says, in these days of truthfulness and sincerity are sorely afflicted in the clutches of falsehood. and justice is tormented by the scourge of injustice. The smoke of corruption hath enveloped the whole world in such wise that naught can be seen in any direction save regiments of soldiers, and nothing is heard from any land but the clashing of swords. This is Baha'u'llah speaking. He says, we beseech God, the True One, to strengthen the wielders of His power in that which will rehabilitate the world and bring tranquility to the nations. So what qualities are being sorely afflicted? Truthfulness. As you know, truthfulness is the foundation of all human virtues. Ruhi Book 1. And sincerity, the foundation stone of faith. These qualities are at the very heart of the qualities and attributes as Baha'is that we have to distinguish ourselves. So friends, these are just some of the glimpses that I wanted to share with you of what, when we say transformation of character, this incredible concept that all these universal manifestations of God have brought. And he says, and yet is not the object of every revelation to effect a transformation of character. This transformation in the whole character of mankind is at the very heart of the revelation of every one of these universal teachers. And if we do not transform, friends, this is what Baha'u'llah says, these manifestations would be futile. That is very profound, friends. This is what my talks, our evening talk on transformation of character is about. This is what our morning talk is about. What are the qualities that is essential? What are these qualities that we have to, acquire? And we're talking today about sincerity. So he says, this is also from the beloved guardian. The believers, and particularly those who have had sufficient experience in teaching, should be very careful in the way they present the teachings of the cause. This is very important too, friends. Sincerity, devotion, and faith are not the sole conditions of successful teachings. How important are they? That was from me. How important are they? Sincerity, devotion, and faith are not the sole conditions of successful teaching. He goes on, he says, tactfulness, extreme caution, and wisdom are equally important. We should not be in a hurry when we announce the message to the public. We should be careful to present the teachings in their entirety and not to alter them for the sake of others. Allegiance to the faith cannot be partial and half-hearted. Either should we accept the cause without any qualification whatsoever, or cease calling ourselves Baha'is. The new believers should be made to realize that it is not sufficient for them to accept some aspects of the teachings and reject those which cannot suit their mentality in order to become fully recognized and active followers of the faith. In this way, all sorts of misunderstandings will vanish and the organic unity of the cause will be preserved. That is from the beloved guardian, directives from the guardian, page 11. So, the qualities of sincerity, devotion, and faith are not the sole conditions of successful teachings. He mentions tactfulness, extreme caution, and wisdom are equally as important. The guardian goes on, he says, purity of heart, honesty of mind, sincerity of motive were characteristics deeply prized by the Shoghi Effendis. Purity of heart, honesty of mind, sincerity of motive. Heart, mind, and action. Purity of heart, honesty of mind, sincerity of motive were characteristics deeply prized by Shoghi Effendi. This is from Ministry of the Custodians, page 114. He says these characteristics he felt were strongly represented in the so-called primitive peoples. They drew him to them and increased his conviction that the cause of God has tremendous future amongst the dark-skinned peoples of the world, and that they have great racial gifts of mind and heart to bring to the service of this faith. Purity of heart, honesty of mind, sincerity of motive. And he praised the people of dark skin, that they had these great qualities. The beloved guardian poured and showered love on them for having these great qualities that are essential prerequisites for a transformation of character. And as mentioned, transformation of character is at the very heart of all the revelations. Now, friends, we're coming to the point. I know it's, I got a signal on the time. Our morning sessions a little shorter than our evening sessions. But friends, I wanted to share with you now a glimpse of two shining lights. These are two shining lights of Isfahan. And last night we talked about the pride of the martyrs, His Holiness Baha'i. And today we want to talk to you about the king of the martyrs and the beloved of the martyrs. Now friends, if you recall, His Holiness Baha'u'llah in his last major work, the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, Baha'u'llah talked about these two great souls. And these two great souls were put to death by the son of the wolf. And that was Sheikh Muhammad Taghi Najafi at his instruction. So, friends, we're going to find out who these souls were and how magnificently, how incredibly they manifested the qualities and attributes of Baha'u'llah, like a stainless mirror. And that this quality that I was talking about today, sincerity, how truly sincere and pure their hearts were. So, friends, without any further ado, I'm going to take you through the lives of these two souls. These two celebrated martyrs were pure descendants of Muhammad in body and soul. They were two fragrant roses of beautiful color from his rose garden, and were named after his two grandsons, Hassan and Hussein. Their home was in the city of Isfahan, one of the great cities of Persia. They were distinguished from all others in excellence, popularity, and wealth, and were two shining stars in the heaven of the cause of His Holiness Baha'u'llah. During the years 1844 and 1845, when dawned the morning of reality, the horizon of their race was illumined with divine lights, and was honored and favored with the garment of guidance. In 1846, His Holiness the Bab because of the uprising of the learned men, was banished by order of the government from his native town, Shiraz, to Isfahan. Then those who were thirsty for the water of knowledge and were seeking after the truths of religion in that city, Isfahan attained to their wish through meeting His Holiness the Bab and were satisfied. One night, Mirza Ibrahim, the noble father of Hassan and Hussein, invited Bab to his house. Thus that place became illumined with the light of his presence, and on that night showers from the clouds of grace and bounty poured down incessantly, and the heavenly banquet descended without interruption. From that time the light of guidance illumined the court of the consciousness of that entire family, and they were renowned for their devotion to this cause, and became graceful and fruit-bearing trees in the divine rose garden. His Holiness Baha'u'llah was after this banished from Persia by the order of the government. The Blessed Party arrived in Baghdad in 1852, and that city was thus for 11 years the dawning point of the light of guidance, the center of the diffusion of truth, and the dwelling place of the followers of pure religion and wisdom. During this time, it was the privilege of these two brothers to travel from Isfahan to Baghdad. They attained to the meeting and the nearness of the holy presence of Baha'u'llah, and quaffed for a time from the sweet flowing, salubrious river of the divine fountainhead. They became intoxicated with the life-giving wine of the love of God, achieved that which they wished, and their utmost hopes were realized. They implored the source of favor and bounty, that they might attain to the heights of glory and wealth, and this prayer was answered. When they returned to Isfahan, they had become like two falcons with powerful wings, soaring to the apex of material and spiritual success. They were as new creations, and a wonderful spirit appeared in these holy temples. The light in their faces announced the glad tidings of the bounties and bestowals of God. Their hearts reflected the divine light. Their countenances were radiant and luminous. Their characters were like a rose garden. Their words gentle, and their utterances were full of the precious gems of knowledge and spiritual susceptibilities. They were rich in the wealth of God and independent of all else save Him. In addition to this, they attracted attention because of their material wealth. Their resources were plenteous from the business in which they were engaged, and great was their reputation. The range of their business was extensive. They were in continual business relations with other cities, and the important affairs of their city were entrusted to them. They associated with the leaders, the learned, the influential and wealthy merchants, with the high officials, and were sought out by the needy and dependent. They were a refuge to the poor, a shelter for the orphans and widows, a protection for the failing ones, an ample treasury for the needy, a physician's remedy for every sick one, and a help to every hungry traveler. They never refused those who asked of them, and were the hope of the hopeless. The door of their generosity was always open to everyone. For this reason, during the famine of Isfahan, these two brothers gave away their wealth and furnished provision for the starving, caring for and saving them from death. In those days, the antagonism of the people to the Baha'is was very great. The scholars of Islam called them infidels and sentenced them to death, and the government at that time willingly or unwillingly executed them. Everyday news reached the ears of the people of the various methods used in confiscating the property of the Baha'is and in murdering and imprisoning them. In this persecution, Isfahan led all the cities. A wealthy and powerful Mohammedan mullah there through his influence and authority, causing the murder of a great number of Baha'is. One by one, he attacked these innocent people with his claws and teeth, tearing and biting the harmless sheep and shedding their blood. For this reason, he was named Zaib, the wolf, and his son, who succeeded him, was called the son of the wolf. Baha'u'llah wrote for the awakening and guidance of this person a long and detailed epistle, which is now circulated throughout the world. It is called the Book of the Shaykh and the Epistle of the Son of the Wolf. The government of Isfahan was at that time in the hands of a cruel and unjust prince who destroyed many lives, confiscated property, and seemed to derive special pleasure from the shedding of the blood of the innocent and oppressed. If the injustice and cruelty of this governor were told, the narration thereof would fill a large volume. At such a time as this, these two brothers, Hassan and Hussein, opened their home to all the Baha'is, fully performing their duties, fearing no one. Nay, rather they were the standard bearers of this blessed cause in that city, and the protectors of the oppressed. Whenever an attack was made by the enemies on any of the innocent, They used every possible means to save that one. Their house was looked upon as the center for the Baha'is, who traveled back and forth and for general meetings. They feared not the hatred of the mullahs, nor their public attacks, and were so intoxicated with the wine of love and faith that they completely forgot themselves. They seemed not to live on this earth, but to be soaring in another, an infinite realm. When His Holiness Baha'u'llah was in Baghdad, these two brothers, longing for martyrdom, sent a petition to him, asking that their blood might be shed for the succor of the tree of the cause of God, and that they might ascend to the kingdom. Indeed, in heart and spirit, they had already arrived at their goal and had attained to true martyrdom, which is severance from one's own desire and annihilation in the will of God. Such was the state of affairs until in 1878 the great tragedy concerning these two brothers, which is here described, took place. In the city of Isfahan there lived a wealthy Mohammedan leader. So numerous were his followers, and so great was his influence, that even the governor, strong and independent though he was, had to defer to him. Baha'u'llah called this person the Raksha, that is, snake, of beautiful spots with moles full of poison. Raksha owned the two brothers more than $20,000, and his property was in their control. In this year of 1878, they asked him to settle his account. And then a satanic scheme occurred to him. He determined to do away with them by accusing them of being Baha'is. Thus could he escape the paying of his debts, and he might perhaps even plunder their great possessions. He disclosed confidentially this wicked plan to Sheikh Zeb, the wolf, who responded with the utmost hatred and bloodthirstiness and promised his assistance. Together they resolved to carry out their terrible plan, and accordingly called upon the governor and, complaining, said, "These brothers, because of their high positions and many virtues, are gradually drawing the people into the cause of Baha'u'llah and are destroying the religion of Islam. Therefore, it is your duty to bestir yourself that we may exterminate them." The prince at first was delighted, but later he asked to be excused, saying, "No one has ever seen them commit any unseemly deed. Nay, rather, they are adorned with qualities and deeds which are pleasing to God and His creatures. For what crime could they be punished?" They replied, "There can be no greater crime than to leave the religion of Islam and take shelter under the shadow of a new religion." The prince then said, "They are the descendants of Muhammad, and we will be responsible to God." They answered, "We are willing to accept that responsibility, as we will be the true murderers." Then Raksha the snake, he was so impatient and so anxious to have them killed, placed his hands upon his own neck, thus signifying that the responsibility would fall upon him. The prince said, "These two brothers are actively engaged in business in many cities, and it is certain that if such a tragedy were to happen, many merchants would suffer loss. Their voices would be raised in protest, and the Shah himself might perhaps start an investigation." They replied, "We assume entire responsibility, and will give you a written statement to the effect that we are prepared to answer any question which may be asked by the Shah or by the merchants." Then they gave him a statement in their own handwriting and promised him a large portion of the great fortune which they would appropriate. The prince at last agreed to their plan and decided to act accordingly. He advised them, however, to keep the matter secret for the time being and not to let anyone know about it. When the Mohammedan Christmas, the anniversary of the birthday of the Prophet Muhammad, came round, it was customary for the people to call upon the governor and the scholars. This year, a large number of varying rank, including a group of the governor's supporters, gathered at that time at the meeting place of Raksha, the snake. All their plans were prepared in such fashion that the two brothers, upon their arrival, would be arrested. The two younger brothers of the king of the martyrs went to the meeting. When they were seated and had commenced drinking their tea, Raksha began to rebuke them severely, saying, "You are Baha'is, infidels, unclean, and are leading the Muslims astray." Then he gave orders that the teacups be knocked from their hands and the tea spilled. At this the butlers dragged the brothers to the prince, heaping upon them meanwhile the greatest humiliations. Not knowing where the eldest and most eminent brother, the king of the martyrs, might be, Raksha started a search for him. He was at that time at the home of a famous mullah of the city. This mullah had the deepest love for him and held in high respect his ideals, his character, and his knowledge. The king of the martyrs, on his arrival at the mullah's home, said to him, "Through the intrigues of Raksha, and just because of his desire for my possessions, a terrible tragedy will occur today. He has made full preparations for my martyrdom." The mullah was a near relative of the prince, and because of this fact was confident that his home could render protection. Warm-heartedly he said, "I will tell the prince of the intrigues of Raksha, and I will never allow any trouble to occur." By this time Raksha had located the king of the martyrs, and his men, noisily seeking him, had arrived at the mullah's home. The mullah instructed his representative to dismiss the men, whereupon they returned to Raksha and informed him of the situation. The mullah's messenger meanwhile acquainted the prince with what had occurred and insisted that he listen to the advice of the mullah. Whereupon the prince at once sent his foremost and strongest deputy with more than 100 heedless ones, with strict orders for the arrest of the king of the martyrs. The deputy gave the mullah a letter which warned him against protecting the king of the martyrs and said that dissension among the influential mullahs would lead to terrible results. When these violent and cruel officers stormed the house, the mullah at last fully realized the state of affairs. Compelled to go to the king of the martyrs with the utmost anguish and vehemence, he explained the situation. Whereupon the king of the martyrs, without grief or agitation, but rather with supreme joy, hastened out of his shelter and to the altar of love. The officers surrounded him as though he were a criminal and dragged him to the governor. While he was being dragged along in that sad and sorrowful state, the crowds filled the streets and with their teeth gripped the finger of astonishment and amazement. Some of the people were weeping, but the king of the martyrs was as happy and thankful as though he were about to attend a concert or a delightful musical entertainment. When the city hall was reached, he presented the agent with his watch and some of his handsome clothing, and apologizing said, "I am at present unable to give you more than this." As he stepped into the presence of the prince, he saw his brother. Suddenly the prince, with insolent words, commenced to chide and insult him because of his religious belief. But the king of the martyrs, with supreme courtesy, said, "Your Excellency, if you but knew what I know, I would never utter with your tongue such unbecoming statements and falsehoods." The prince became very angry at this, and with a walking stick he struck the king of the martyrs, severely wounding him on head, face, and body, insisting the while he deny and curse the cause. But the king of martyrs held his silence. The mullah who loved him so much was present, and he perceived that his friend's mouth was very dry. He ordered water to be brought, and with the utmost courtesy and gentleness, the king of the martyrs wet his lips. The prince was exceedingly surprised and said to the mullah, "Strange it is that even under such circumstances as these, he shows a refinement and courtesy which are his essential characteristics." In brief, seeing the strength of the edifice of their faith and the firmness of their stand in their religion, the prince in a fury ordered that these two brothers be dragged away by their chains and put in prison, and that his plundering servants should strip them of their clothes. Raksha, on his part, sent a company of his men to their home. They attacked the women and the little children who were weeping from fear and distress. They imprisoned them all in one place, and for a long time made them to suffer from hunger and thirst. They plundered and confiscated all the money, jewelry, and furniture which were in the house. In like manner they went to their store and took everything they could find. The prince also sent a man to the prison to search the pockets of the two brothers and bring him all their checks, notes, and receipts. He took all their investments and everything that was deposited in the banks. On that same day he also claimed all their servants, who were many in number. Now while the two brothers were in prison, many telegrams were sent by merchants from different cities to the prince, informing him that this disturbance was causing great material losses and was a severe blow to business. The news also came that the Shah even had dispatched a telegram ordering that the brothers be sent to Tehran, but greediness for wealth and fear of Sheikh Zeb the wolf and Raksha the snake finally induced him to put the two brothers to death, and let the responsibility fall upon the wolf and the snake, and falsely to declare that the Shah's telegram was not received until after they had been killed. The prince all this time persistently urged these two great souls to deny the cause of God, declaring that to say even "we are not Baha'is" would be sufficient to save their lives. But each time those two miracles of steadfastness cried out loudly, "Ya Baha el-Abha, O thou glory of the most glorious, our utmost desire is this, that our lives may be a sacrifice in the path of the love of that manifestation of reality, in the spreading of his divine teachings." At last the prince offered to spare their lives if $13,000 were paid to him, and he gave permission for the youngest brother, Mirza Ismail, to go and bring the money. But the sheikh, the wolf, and the Raksha, the snake, who were anxious to have them killed on the 8th day of their imprisonment, called a meeting and brought together a large number of mullahs and judges. All demanded and insisted that the prince should pronounce the death sentence, and declared that they would assume every responsibility in this world and the world to come. Whereupon the prince said, "Then you are the murderers," and he instructed the executioner to carry out all the wishes of those two oppressors, at which they ordered the executioner to kill the two brothers immediately. The executioner with drawn sword appeared in the prison at a moment when the king of martyrs was talking to and admonishing his younger brother this: "O brother, the original intention of these persecutors was to kill me only. Just say, 'My brother is a Baha'i, not I.' Then your life will be spared. After I am killed, take care of the family and bring up the wronged little ones." The beloved of the martyrs replied, "O brother, the beloved one will give the best of protection to those whom we will leave behind, and faithfulness requires that you and I be together in all the worlds of God." The executioner was one of those who for many years had enjoyed the hospitality and generosity of the two brothers. He begged of them, saying, "Just say a word denying your religion, then your lives will be saved, and I shall not commit so terrible a crime." The king of the martyrs answered, "You are under orders, and it is your duty to execute them." So that bloodthirsty oppressor took them to the field of martyrdom of hope, and bandaged their eyes during a period of about an hour. Each of them hoped that he might be martyred first, and might step out of this world before the other. The sheikh, the wolf, and Raksha, the snake, meanwhile were strolling upon an elevation, talking to each other exultantly, while waiting, watching with cruel hearts that pitiful scene. They signaled the executioner to finish his work, so as the two brothers embraced one another, calling on the greatest name, "Ya Baha al-Bapa," and offered thanks to God. He cut off their heads and stained their blessed bodies with blood and dust. He then tied their feet with a rope and threw the bodies in a public square, that the crowds might see them. After this, the bodies were taken to a hollow piece of ground under a great wall, which had been wrecked in order to conceal the bodies, and placed them beyond reach. But in the middle of the dark night, the youngest brother, Mirza Ismail, with several of the servants, rescued the bodies from under the stones and wreckage, and carried them outside the city, washed them at the river's bank, wrapped them in winding sheets, and then, summoning gravediggers, and unknown to anyone, asked them to dig 2 graves in the cemetery. But the gravediggers were afraid lest the wolf and the snake might hear of it, so the 2 bodies were buried there, in that place, and the men returned to their homes in a panic of fear. Persecutors and disregarders of truth that they were, those people, especially Sheikh Zeb, the wolf, imagined that by the killing of these 2 great souls, the cause of God would be wiped out, and that with the uprooting of these 2 fruit-bearing trees from the divine rose garden, there would remain nor trace nor sign of the eternal rose garden. After this tragedy, they ordered detectives to watch for and to kill any Baha'is who might come into the city, and to inform them if any Baha'i meetings were held. They searched, and in vain, to find the graves of the 2 martyrs, in order that they might destroy the bodies. The patience and fortitude of these great martyrs, while enduring calamities, and while losing their possessions and their families in the path of His Holiness, the Chosen One, and their joyful and willing acceptance of ordeals, is the greatest proof of the power, influence, greatness, and truth of this cause. Moreover, the mighty influence of this great cause upon the spiritual training of mankind became clear and evident, manifested as it was in these martyrs through their greatness, their important positions, both material and spiritual, and through their cultivation and their severance. In like manner, the wickedness of the leaders of the people, their tyranny and selfishness became apparent to everyone. Indeed, this great calamity affected not only the Baha'is, but many of the fanatical people mourned them and paid tribute to them, chanting poems, weeping and wailing, of which this is one of the verses. Heaven perhaps had none other arrow than this in its quiver. Soon after these happenings, relations were broken between Raksha and the prince. Raksha fled and hid himself, After a while, on that place, on his neck, which he had indicated when he stood before the prince and said, I am willing to have the responsibility of killing the two brothers, fall on my neck. There appeared an abscess, which became so infected and unpleasant that his own family even avoided him, and drove him away from the house to a garden out of the city, where he finally died. Sheikh Zayed the wolf and the son of the wolf suffered humiliation and degradation, and became as fruitless and useless trees. As to the prince, he was driven away by the Shah and was hated by him. He fell into the depths of abasement, and finally expelled by the Persian government, was forced to live in exile from his country. He returned once to Persia in order to live in his native land, according to his own desires, on the enormous wealth which he had accumulated, but the people prevented this by throwing him in prison and punishing him very severely. In this connection, a story may be related. During the unjust administration of this prince, there lived in Isfahan an oppressed Baha'i. He was a target for the whip of the mullahs, accused by them of infidelity, and his property was plundered and confiscated. Fearful for his life, he concealed himself in places where he could not be found. Once he appealed to the prince, reminding him of the sighs and cries of the oppressed, the broken-hearted and the helpless. He also tried to remind him of his responsibility to God. The prince replied with the greatest arrogance and contempt, saying, Go to Abdul-Baha and accuse me, and let him do with me whatever he can. An insult such as this hurt this broken-hearted Baha'i more than anything else. Later on, when the prince was indicted, despised, imprisoned, and expelled, and was in utter humiliation, that Baha'i traveled from his native town to that prison, met the prince, made himself known to him, and reminded him, saying, Some years ago I spoke to you of my sufferings due to cruelty and oppression, and of how all my possessions had been confiscated, and I had no place of safety and rest, and how I must needs, through fear of my enemies, conceal myself at every moment. You said to me, Go to Abdul-Baha and accuse me. Though orally I did not accuse you in his presence, yet the justice of God requires punishment and reward. For this reason, His Holiness Baha'u'llah said, The tent of the order of the world is supported and upheld by two pillars, punishment and reward. Therefore, whatever has happened is inevitable and ordained. In a word, those powerful enemies under such conditions passed away from this world, and their light became extinguished. But their honors, the King of the martyrs and the beloved of the martyrs, have ignited a light which will shine forever. All the days of their life unto the day of martyrdom, the nostrils of the spiritual ones were ever perfumed by their fragrance. During their lifetime, they were very prominent, just and happy, and were loved by all. Because they held their souls in their hands, sacrificed them in the path of the true friend, and took their stand near to the great mercy in the Abha, most glorious kingdom. Numerous tablets were revealed from the pen of Baha'u'llah concerning their exalted station and the grief of the supreme concourse for their ordeals. Such jewels of divine subtleties and infinite favors were revealed that they will remain throughout the everlastingness of the world and the kingdom. The spiritual titles, the King of the martyrs and the beloved of the martyrs, were granted them, and now by these merciful names they are well known in the East and the West. Friends, that was the account of the beloved of the martyrs and the king of the martyrs. Incredible souls. I share these glimpses of our history, which we should become so knowledgeable on, like it's our own family. Know every detail and let it come and pour off from our tongues and bring it forth to our eyes. Remind ourselves of these acts of valor, acts of courage and purity of heart and sincerity of devotion. We need to bring their lives to the forefront. We need to study the dawnbreakers, friends. We need to study our history. We need to read Godvas's Baha'i. We need to study and bring forth these souls to our forefront of our mind and our hearts and emulate these acts of purity of devotion. In this day and age, the beloved guardian says, we should be living martyrs. Living martyrs. Now, what is a living martyr? It is, we are living in this world, but our acts of purity of heart, sincerity of heart, and all of the virtues that I mentioned prior, we manifest them. We manifest them, the truthfulness, the sincerity, the forbearance. We need to manifest the piety, trustworthiness, and truthfulness. These are qualities that Baha'u'llah, the beloved Master Abdul Baha, he says that we should manifest. He says the essential principles of the healing remedies are the knowledge and love of God. This is from Abdul Baha. He says the essential. Essential means incredibly important. He says the essential principles of his healing remedies are the knowledge and love of God, severance from all save God, turning our faces in sincerity toward the kingdom of God, implicit faith, firmness, and fidelity, loving kindness toward all creatures, and the acquisition of the divine virtues indicated for the human world. These are the fundamental principles of progress, civilization, international peace, and the unity of mankind. These are the essentials of Baha'u'llah's teachings, the secret of everlasting health, the remedy and healing of men. Incredibly powerful. The secret of the very heart of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. So at the very heart was transformation of character. Now what is the transformation of character? It says, Abdul Baha says it here. He says, at the very heart is essential principles of his healing remedies are knowledge and love of God. Recognition and knowledge of God. The twin duties. Know him and obedience to his command. It's recognition of him. But it says here is now knowledge, ihsan, and love of God, to whom the heart illumined with the love of God, and severance, fana, from all save God, turning our faces in sincerity toward the kingdom of God, implicit faith, firmness and fidelity, loving kindness toward all creatures, and the acquisition of the divine virtues indicated for the human world. Now, again, I read this because, friends, this is at the very center of who and what it is to be a Baha'i. It says these are the fundamental principles of progress, civilization, international peace, and the unity of mankind. It says these are the essentials of Baha'u'llah's teachings. Essentials of Baha'u'llah's teachings manifest these qualities. And yesterday, friends, last night, as we were enjoying each other's company, and I was going through the talk on transformation of character, I shared with you a quote. I'm just going to pull it here for you right now. And it is the quote from the beloved guardian. And in the beloved guardian, as you know, he says, not by a force of numbers, not by a campaign of teaching. He says one thing and only one thing, unfailingly secured undoubted triumph of this cause, namely the extent to which our inner life and private character mirror forth the manifold characteristics reflected by Baha'u'llah. I paraphrase, I apologize. Didn't have it in front of me. But the character, our character, mirror forth the manifold aspects of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. Now, this what it is mean to be Baha'i. Abdul-Baha, Promulgation of Universal Peace, 205. Abdul-Baha, Promulgation of Universal Peace, page 205, lists the qualities and attributes right there, and he says these are the divine virtues. These are the fundamental principles. These are the essentials of Baha'u'llah's teachings, friends. And I shared with you the story of these two shining lights of Isfahan, the beloved of the martyrs and the king of the martyrs, as an example, friends, to see how we as individuals can reflect, meditate on our own lives. How can we become living martyrs? How can we work on transformation of character? How can you, in your daily life, reflect on the lives of these great souls, Martha Root, Keith Ransom Keller, Leroy Ayers, the hands of the cause of God? How can we reflect on their characters and work to emulate them, work to transform our hearts, transform our characters, so that we can work to emulate their qualities and attributes and become ever closer to what the standard is, so that we may become closer to what it is, as that quote from Abdul-Baha, he says, if he is a Baha'i in reality, his deeds and actions will be decisive proofs of it. So, friends, and he says the qualities and requirements are love of mankind, sincerity toward all, reflecting the oneness of world of humanity, philanthropy, becoming enkindled with the fire of the love of God, attainment to the knowledge of God, and that which is conducive to human welfare. How do you become enkindled with the fire of the love of God? Enkindled with the fire of the love of God. Now think about it, friends. We all go through life and we find that person who we fall in love with. But it's generally often not love at first sight. Often we meet that person more than once, and then we get closer to that person. It takes time for our minds to get over all the hurdles and our hearts to be touched by that individual. It is the same with the faith, friends. We have to meet with the writings. We have to say our obligatory prayers, recite the 95 Allahs. We need to fast, friends. Baha'u'llah calls it the sun and the moon. Friends, we have to obey the commandments and work on this transformation of character. And what does this do? Friends, this is a process of transforming the iron into the steel. And that process, it takes heat, it takes pressure, and it takes incredible amount of suffering to that poor iron. But the change happens. The character changes as the coal changes into the diamond. Friends, and this is what Baha'u'llah says. Transformation. And it's not, and in yesterday's talk, I shared with you a quote from the Universal House of Justice. He says that this is often a slow process. A slow process. Slow process means that you have to work on it every day. Ruse by ruse. Every day by day. We need to say our prayers. We need to turn our hearts Baha'u'llah. We have to bring ourselves to account each day. Focus on how can I tomorrow be a better person than I was the day prior. How can I bring myself to account so I can be a better reflection and manifest the qualities and attributes put forth by the revelation of Baha'u'llah. How can I do this? So you put it forth in your mind. You read the writings more, so you have the example before you. And you meditate and reflect. You pray. You call out and you ask and seek for these qualities. And you become ever closer to your Lord. You also do service. You teach. Remember, Abdul Baha was the servant of Baha'u'llah. He served all humanity, friends, in everywhere he went. He was an exemplar of service. Friends, this is something that he says in the quote here. He says, philanthropy enkindled with the fire of love of God and serving all humanity. Enkindling with the fire of love of God is an incredible thing. The more you, as I said, the more you meet that individual, the more you meet with your future wife or your future husband, you fall in love, and you fall in love, and your heart starts burning, and your words, your mental, your faculties, it's all who you are. You cannot think about anything but your love. Now, friends, this is what Baha'u'llah wants of us to Him. He wants us to burn with the love for Him and dive into service, dive into teaching the cause, and dive into giving our lives in service to the cause. Friends, this is nothing nobler than this. And I am getting a signal on time again, friends. I'm wishing you a wonderful conference. It has been a great honor to speak with you. I want to thank the coordinating committee and thank all the friends that have put on this great occasion. And just wanted to share my thoughts on transformation of character, as well as the qualities and attributes that are essential and prerequisites for this transformation of character so stressed by the manifestations of God. Thank you, dear friends. Wishing you the best. Allah.